We acknowledge that we are meeting tonight on a traditional, unceded, and unsurrendered Mi'kmaq heritage. Welcome. Every year, the Dalhousie Black Student Advisory Center brings together students, faculty, staff, and the community to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Day. On this day every year, we commemorate the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., not only as a reminder what he did for the Black people in America, but rather as a reminder to us of his sacrifice for a cause he strongly believed in. A cause that transcends skin, color, religion, gender, geography, or political affiliation. Dr. Martin Luther King showed us that human rights and dignity should be paramount in any society. He showed us that our human destiny is inexplicable, bound such that we cannot deny some people their rights while upholding it for others. He demonstrated to us that the end can never justify the means. And in doing so, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. Standing on the words of this great man, let's not walk alone in our fight against every vestige of discrimination and bigotry. Let us join hands, our hearts and minds for every corner of the globe and make a firm stand against all kinds of discrimination, injustice cloaked in the mantle of love and unity. This year, the discussion continues on Black Lives Matter. And we continue to remember the lives of Black people all over the world that were lost to violence and police brutality. We'll also discuss the protests against the statues, Islamophobia, building of the wall, Donald Trump's presidency and policies, and how this has affected us in Canada using the lens of Dr. Martin Luther King. Before I introduce the moderator for tonight, I would like to play a short music. The topic of that music is I Stand in the Rain by Andra Rollins. This music is to honor the lost voices of those who have died due to police brutality, violence, and abuse. The song is also to remember the late Erica Gardner, the 27-year-old daughter of Eric Gardner, who was choked to death by the police in New York. Erica was part of the Black Lives Movement, looking for justice that she never lived to achieve.
I'll stand beside you each step of the way. I'll see you through. There's work left to do, so no more lives will be lost in vain. I'll stand in the rain. I'll take my place, though you can't see my face. You can't see my eyes, all the tears that I've cried. You can't feel my heart, but I'll do my part to bring awareness from out of the dark. I'll do my part. I'll stand in the rain, I'll stand in the snow. I'll carry my message wherever I go, to bring peace and healing, to help the world's pain. I'll stand in the rain. I'll stand in the rain. I'll weather each storm in hopes that compassion will one day be the norm. My voice may be gone, but my spirit is strong. I'll stand in the rain. Don't turn away, don't close your eyes. My friend, it's time to realize there's a lot to do. So reach out your hand, we'll heal the pain across this land. Together we'll stand. We'll stand in the rain, we'll stand in the snow. We'll carry our message so people will know. Our voices are gone, but our spirits live on. We'll stand in the rain. We'll stand in the rain, we'll weather each storm in hope that compassion will one day be the norm. Our voices are silent, our spirits remain. We'll stand in the rain. If we all work together, we'll see a new day. We'll stand in the rain. Our voices are gone, but our spirit lives on.
We are indeed going to stand in the rain and let our voices be heard. I'll now introduce the moderator for the evening, Dr. Isaac Sani. Dr. Isaac Sani is director of the Transition Year Program at Dalhousie University. The groundbreaking program established in 1970 to redress the barriers and injustices of Mi'kmaq, other First Nations, and African Nova Scotian learners face when undertaking post-secondary education. Dr. Sani is an adjunct professor of history at St. Mary's University. His teaching and scholarship encompasses Africa, the Caribbean, the U.S. civil rights movement, Cuba, and Black Nova Scotian history. He's a long-time community activist and participant in the anti-war movement and the anti-racist struggle, and is the co-chair and national spokesperson for the Canadian Network on Cuba. He holds a PhD in history from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, a premier World Center for the Study of Africa, Asia, and Middle East. He's the author of the acclaimed book, Cuba, The Revolution in Motion, and is currently finishing another book, manuscript, African Children Return, Cuba, the War in Angola, and the End of Apartheid. Dr. Sani's roots lie in Black Nova Scotian community and the Caribbean. Please help us welcome.
First, thank you, Ronke. This magnificent note demonstrates that Black lives do matter. But before we proceed, we have been asked, and I think this is only appropriate, for moments of silence for two reasons. First, January 15th marks the anniversary of the first Back to Africa movement in the Americas. That is when 1,196 Black loyalists left Halifax, Nova Scotia, and returned to Sierra Leone. I think that's a tremendous historical feat that we must also pay tribute to, as well as many people have been talking about the fact that slavery has returned in Libya. We have the Africans once again being used as commodities, being reduced to cogs in the economic machine. And so many people, I think, would appreciate a moment of silence so we can stand and acknowledge not only the victims of history's injustice, but the ongoing victims of this unjust international system. Thank you. And also for those who are still standing by the wall or outside, there's some space here in the middle aisle. So if people want to be able to sit down, it's great to see such a packed house. And it's great that these annual Martin Luther King events, to mark his life, not only to mark his birthday, to mark his accomplishments, continue to be such a staple in the progressive calendar. Ronke, as Black Student Advisor, and all the people who work behind you, I think they deserve a round of applause. We have a rich panel ahead of us, and I think we'll learn quite a bit. I think we'll be inspired, and we'll be able to reflect on many of the, not only accomplishments of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but the relevance of his message and his thinking for today. I think organizing an event today is particularly apt, not only because of the challenges that face us in today's world. We only have to think about the fiasco with Hawaii and the missile scare, to think of Trump's recent vicious and horrible comments about countries of Africa and also of Asia, and to think of all the things that are unfolding across the world, to appreciate the profound nature of organizing and recognizing and honoring and validating Dr. King's legacy. It's also important to understand that this year, 2018, will be the 50th anniversary of his assassination on April 7th of this year. And before I introduce the panel, I just thought I'd share some of his observations in the last year of his life, as he was beginning to realize that there needed to be a fundamental transformation of the heart, of the mind, and of material conditions of society. He observed, and this is a direct quote, this is in the last year of his life, when machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, militarism, and economic exploitation are incapable of being conquered. End of quote. King understood that while the civil rights movement had won important victories, these victories could not be permanent, as the underlying structural roots of inequality, poverty, and racism were not fundamentally altered. In short, society had to be radically transformed. In a 1967 speech to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, King unequivocally articulated this analysis. And this is quite a profound analysis when we think of what's unfolding in the world. This is a quote, and he begins, "One day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you're raising questions about the economic system, about the broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalist economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more, we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. We're being called on to help the discouraged beggars in life's marketplace. But one day we must come to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. It means that questions must be raised. You see, my friends, when you deal with this, you begin to ask the question, who owns the oil? You begin to ask the question, who owns the iron ore? You begin to ask the question, why is it that people have to pay water bills in a world that is 2/3 water? These are the questions that must be asked. And I think this lays out a fundamental framework in which the question of black lives, actually having to say black lives matter in today's world, really underscores the injustice and the inequities we are battling against. So today we have a distinguished panel to address many of these questions, right? In the way that Martin Luther King, I think, would have wanted his legacy to be remembered, but also actualized in 2018. Speaking first will be Tiffany Gordon. Tiffany Gordon is a second-year PhD student in the program of philosophy at Dalhousie University. Her areas of research include social and political thought, philosophy of race, and feminist philosophy. She's particularly interested in the gap between formal and substantive inequality in Canada and the way in which knowledge systems work to obscure and delegitimize minority experiences of oppression. Gordon wrote her master's thesis on racial profiling which she did at McMaster University, and did an undergraduate degree in political science and philosophy at York University. I should also add, beyond this description of her academic pursuits, she has been very active in the community, and I sit on the Working While Back Committee, where we're focusing on basically the street checks that are ongoing in Halifax. So she both combines her academic pursuits with an attempt to transform society. The next speaker is Zenobia Williams-Pelly. She graduated in sociology with a focus on empowerment. She is currently in a social work program here at Dalhousie University. She is the current acting chair of the Black United Students Association at Dalhousie University. And throughout her academic career, she has focused on the intersectional ways women and girls have been affected and have experienced sexualized violence in North America and the resulting discourses. Speaking third is Ms. Amina Abawaji, and I have to say one thing, she's given us the shortest, Amina's given us the shortest bow. She's so humble, right? She graduated in computer science and international development studies from Dalhousie University. That's a unique combination, I must say. She's currently the president of the Dalhousie Student Union, making her the first female Muslim and the first black executive in the history of the Dalhousie Union. And I have to say, when I was an undergrad student, I did serve on the Dalhousie Student Union Council, right? And I must say, it was quite a battle back then to get these issues raised. And so you have been a trailblazer for us. Thank you. And fourth, but last but not least, okay, she probably needs no introduction, right? I think of her as the mother of Dalhousie, right? Okay, and I've known her a very long time. Is Dr. Barbara Hamilton Hinch. She has grown up in the African Nova Scotian community of Beachville, and everyone knows she's a tremendous advocate for the preservation of the legacy and of that community and its various existence. Her father, the late Norman Hamilton, was also from Beachville, and her mother, Bernice McLaughlin, originally Bundy, is from the African Nova Scotian community of Cherrybrook, so two historic communities combined. She is the proud mother of David Anthony, Dylan, and stepson Obadiah. She has two grandchildren, Omari and Kami, and Barb graduated from Dalhousie University with a Bachelor's of Science degree in Recreation Management, a Master's of Arts, then attended Mount St. Vincent University, where she received a Bachelor of Education degree, and completed her PhD in Dalhousie University in the Interdisciplinary Studies program, I might add. She is presently employed at Dalhousie University as an assistant professor in the School of Health and Human Performance. But I should also add that Barb was extremely active as an undergrad. When I was an undergrad in the Black Canadian Students Society, in the Black United Students Society, was trying to unite all the black students, as well as being critical in the student movement that fought and won space for the Black Student Advising Center. So she's been a stalwart in the struggle from her undergraduate days to now. So it's always an honor to have Barb on the panel. Tiffany, you have the floor.
Sure. So I guess I'm just gonna, do I go up or?
If you want to.
No. Okay.
Would you prefer them to go up to the podium?
Oh, you want me
Ralphie
to go
prefers
up?
you to be at the podium.
Okay, sure. For questions, okay. Good evening, everyone. This makes me feel very official, but that's okay. So happy to see such a great turnout. That's amazing. When I was initially thinking about what to speak for tonight, on the one hand, a lot of things came to mind, so it was kind of easy. There are so many different issues happening, especially surrounding the presidency of Trump. A lot of issues of racism, inequality. His recent statements about Caribbean people and Haitians have been despicable. And a lot of this has come to the fore, a lot of overt racism, I think, because of the presidency. So we'll be speaking a little bit about that. So I was thinking, in a sense, it's kind of easy to have this conversation in this context about Dr. King and the civil rights movement, but in a sense, it's a bit difficult. Because over the course of his career, which spanned 12 to around 13 years before he was assassinated, he wrote so much and he spoke about so much. So to have to go through that and pick one particular thing to speak about was a bit difficult. But I was able to focus in on one thing. Before I get there, though, I wanted to address some of the main topics that we see reoccurring in Dr. King's work. So, of course, he's known very well for pacifism, but also he speaks a lot about dignity, economic justice, exploitation, fair treatment, freedom, unconstitutionalism, just causes, moral law, poverty, pacifism, moral health. And as Dr. Saini pointed out, towards the end of his career before he got killed, he really started to focus on a more inclusive platform. So he started a campaign for poverty that he was actually going to participate in the summer of 1968. And that was supposed to bring together a whole bunch of different groups. So Hispanics, blacks, poor whites, anyone who was disenfranchised, anyone who was poor. It was supposed to be another march on Washington. And towards the end of his career, you really see him opening up in ways that are very interesting and very radical. So that's kind of where we start trying to pull apart Dr. King's ideas and trying to apply them to the current context. What I settled on to discuss very briefly is Birmingham and what happened in the spring of 1963, and specifically some of his speeches that came out of that context, but also a letter that he wrote from jail. I decided to focus on that just to kind of set the discussion up tonight, because we will be talking about Black Lives Matter and protests. And in the letter from Birmingham, there are some principles and some ideas that I think are really powerful to continue to return to. So as we all know, he was the leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and that came out of the Montgomery bus boycott, which happened between 1955 and 1956. And what the SCLC ended up doing was they offered support to different cities across the states that needed help to push forward different civil rights agendas. So what they would end up doing is say, Dr. King, SCLC, we have this particular agenda that we're working on, we're having a very difficult time with the state, can you come, can you offer us support? Can you give speeches, can you train us in nonviolence so that we can get this stuff moving, that we can get actions happening? So Birmingham in the spring of 1963 was one of those instances where he came out to a particular community to help to offer his support. And of course, we learn about what happened. It was a very violent reaction to the protest, the march that was set up. The march included kids, it included mothers and children and men as well. And what people saw on TV and in the media was that a lot of this nonviolent protest was met with attacks from different dogs and a lot of police brutality and violence. And what was interesting was that they were protesting the kinds of things that you would think human rights, human beings should have. So they were protesting against segregation, brutality, their mistreatment in courts, and some unsolved bombings that were happening in the area around that time. And in the letter from Birmingham jail, where Dr. King was, and reflecting upon why he had to come to Birmingham, he stated that the protests were necessary, that they actually felt like they had no choice, that they had tried to negotiate with the mayor, they had tried to negotiate with the city, and what they had wanted was unheeded. So direct action for Dr. King, in the letter, he said that it forces people to confront the things that they're not comfortable with confronting. And that's why he saw it as such a powerful tool. And in the letter, he talks about 4 basic steps in nonviolent protests. The first one, the collection of facts to determine that an injustice had been done. The second, an attempt at negotiation. And if that didn't work, self-purification. So that basically involved training people in nonviolent direct action. This was a tactic that was used. It was very difficult to meet violence with nonviolence. So this was something that people were trained to do. And finally, direct action. And I'm just going to end with a quote and some reflections to integrate into Black Lives Matter to kind of set up the discussion. And this is a quote that I find to be very inspirational. So he says in the letter, "You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored." And he goes on to speak about tension and that there's such a thing as a good tension. So often we think about Dr. King, we think about his pacifism, and we think that his pacifism in a sense was very peaceful, very calm, very zen. But here we see that he was very much aware of what pacifism resulted in sometimes, right? Pacifism can be an approach that really does get under people's skin. And I think we see that when we look at Colin Kaepernick taking a kneel, right? A lot of people in the States are in uproar over the fact that he would not stand at the anthem. This is non-violent direct action. It's meant to send a message to people, and it's really, it has a lot of people in uproar. And I see the connection between what Colin Kaepernick is doing, of course, what the Black Lives Matter movement has done in response to historical injustices, and what Dr. King was saying in this particular letter to people. So those are my initial remarks, just to kind of set up my discussion, but also the discussion for the panelists. And I guess we'll see what everyone else has to say. So thanks, everyone.
Before Zenobia takes the podium, it's also, when we talk about Kaepernick, it's also important, this is also the 50th anniversary of the Black Power salute protest at the Mexico Olympics with John Carlos and Tommy Smith.
Very short trip for me. Okay. So hello, and thank you so much for organizing this roundtable. Thank you for everyone coming out. We really do appreciate it. And it's really actually inspiring, really makes me feel very hopeful when all of you are willing to give up your time to come out and listen and participate in a discourse about issues that do indeed affect us all. When I think about Martin Luther King Jr. and him having his dream, I think we're not really quite there as far as realizing it. But the one thing that really sticks out to me, anyway, for Dr. King would be the theme of unity. He didn't believe that to achieve justice was about one person, and about one particular group. He believed that we all had a part to play in it. You saw that through his protests, you saw that through the groups of people that he galvanized. It was actually pretty inspiring. Some people weren't a fan of it, but really we're all in this together. At the end of the day, we're all in a place of disenfranchisement now for the most part, except for one very particular group, which is mostly not most people in this room. Well, that's what I'm going to say, because it's really not. It involves women, it involves minorities, it involves obviously Black people, it involves anybody who's essentially not a white male, okay, and anybody who's not that top 1% of white males. So really, this is all of our fight. Black lives matter because all lives matter, and that's really what it is. At the end of the day, we really do have to understand.
Is that not racist, though? The single out black?
Actually, I'd appreciate it if you give the speaker the respect to finish her words. At the end of it, there will be time for question and answer. Okay?
Sure.
This is a space for Black voices to be heard.
Thanks. Okay, so realistically, the words that really come to mind for me, it's something my mom shared with me that was written by, and I'm going to butcher his name, and I do apologize. And this was written during the Nazi regime. It's by very much to me, and I did not speak out. because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I am not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I am not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left for me. This really speaks to how Black Lives Matter, but it's just all of us that matter, and we all have to stick up for each other, and we all have to take up for each other because we're all so very connected. I kind of revised this just a little bit to do with the Trump effect that's happened in 2018. Okay. First, they came for the blacks, and they killed them in their cars and in their hoodies, like Trayvon Martin. But I'm not black, so I did not speak up. Then they came for the Muslims. They started a travel ban and refused immigration because they were here to kill us. And I did not speak out because I am not a Muslim. Then they came for the transgendered and banned them from serving in the military because their medications cost too much. But I am not transgendered, and so I did not say anything at all. Then they came for women. And we heard from on high that the best way to deal with us was to grab us by the pussy, and called it law firm talk. And I'm not a woman, so I did not speak up. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. For me, that really tells us why Black lives still matter, because all of our lives matter and we all are interconnected. And if we don't take a look at the fascist regime that's being placed at a point of power in this discourse right now, in this particular moment in time, we would be remiss. And I guess that would be all my comments I have to say. Thank you.
An injury to one is an injury to all. Our third speaker will be Amina Abawaji. I think we need, and I think, is the volume low on that one?
Yeah, it is a little low.
I'm just going to switch mics. I suggest that I have a low voice.
I think so.
You're breaking my heart.
So thank you all again for coming and sharing in this discussion with us. And thank you so much to the organizers for all of the hard work that they put into making this event happen. I wanted to start again with the land recognition and recognizing the territory that we're on. So this event is taking place on unceded and unsurrendered Mi'kmaq territory. And as Black people and as people who are organizing for Black liberation, it's very important for us to recognize that the liberation of Black people will not and cannot happen without the liberation of Indigenous people. So like Tiffany, I also was not sure what I should focus on for this discussion. I was fortunate to take part in the panel last year, and I talked about my personal experiences of Islamophobia and anti-Blackness and how they intersect, and the ways in which I experience anti-Blackness in the Muslim community and Islamophobia within the Black community, and how it's hard for folks with intersecting identities to find and build community, and how it's important for those within those intersections and margins to find space and create space. So I didn't want to talk about that again. And so I thought about what was happening presently and things that are happening within my life. I usually talk about personal experiences, so I'm going to do that again. And today I'm going to be focusing on Black children and specifically on how Black children really matter. So I'm not a parent. I don't have any children of my own. I'm not an expert in this area. My knowledge mostly comes from being a Black child at some point, maybe I still am to some people, from my peers and other people growing up, as well as the children that I'm fortunate to have in my life, like my brother and my cousin, who I'll be speaking about shortly. But first I wanted to talk about another child. A child who came here at the age of 6 years old. And this child that I want to speak to you about is Abdul Qadir Abdi. So I remember Abdul Qadir as a student. I remember sitting next to him in social studies class. I remember him as a community member. I remember celebrating Eid with him. And I remember him as a friend. I remember playing video games. And Abdul Qadir Abdi, right now, is facing proceedings of deportation. And the only reason that he is in his current situation is because of failure from the Department of Community Services of Nova Scotia to take care of him as they promised that they would do. They took him under his care, but neglected to perform the duties that would protect him now. So they were the only people who are able to file citizenship application on his behalf. His aunt had attempted to apply for him, but she was told that she was not able to. They did not do so, and now he is facing deportation.
How old is he again?
He is 23.
And does he have a criminal record?
He had completed his sentence,
Aggravation.
and if he, as anyone, had had his paperwork done, he would be with his family today.
So he's a illegal.
He would be here with his daughter.
Listen, if you can, sorry.
Two choices. You either keep quiet or you have to.
Yeah, my point is this, right? We will have a time for question and answer afterwards.
Fair enough.
No, hold on. If you continue to be disruptive,
I know.
we'll ask you to leave.
That's what he just told me.
Yeah. There was a question here, respect, continue.
Thank you. So there have been folks organizing across different cities and have been doing so much work, and today we had a win. So Abdul Qadir Abdi has been released from detention by the halfway house tomorrow, but Canada continues to pursue his deportation. So this is a win, but it is a small win. We need to continue fighting and organizing. We need to continue tweeting, signing petitions, and making our voices heard. So right now, I would encourage all of you to take out a device. I have the link for a petition, and I would ask you all to type that into your phone. So it's bit.ly /2 lowercase r 9 capital X N Z M. And I'll repeat that one more time. It's bit.ly /2RNXNZM. And you can read more about his case and his story. Updates will be posted there regularly, and you are all free to sign in support. So I said that I was going to talk about my younger brother. My brother, his name is Hamza, and he's the most precious person. Him and my sister would have weekly check-ins about his experiences. They would talk about things that he faced in the classroom and elsewhere. And they would unpack issues of systemic oppression. They would talk about racism and sexism and how people see him and engage with him because of the body that he's in. And so my brother is in elementary school. He's 11 years old. And he attends school in Fairview. And so this year, he started not wanting to go to school. He would wake up in the morning and really complain about attending school, and that's where it started. Then he would come home with some bruises, unexplained bruises. We never heard anything from the school or from his teachers. The other day he came home with cuts, scratches on the back of his neck. And again, silence from the school and from the teacher. he finally told us what was going on. He told us that there were some incidences on the playground, and that the one in particular with the scratches, most recently, that someone had approached him. There was an altercation. There was another student who witnessed this altercation. They talked to the person on duty and were taken into the office, and the person received 15-minute detention from lunch. But then he also told us about other things. He told us how the teacher told him not to ask questions, if he had any. He told us about how the teacher told the lunch monitor and any substitute teachers that if any student were to be disruptive, this is the procedure. If Hamza is disruptive, send him directly to the principal's office. For the first week of school, back from the break, he was sick and didn't attend for a couple of days. The first day that he attended, as soon as he walked in, the teacher told the class, "I am grumpy today. Do not push my buttons, Hamza." And he was so embarrassed. He was so excited, looking forward to going back to school after his break. And that had changed his whole day. And there are countless other examples. This is not just happening to one child in one school. The CBC reported just a couple days ago about racist and discriminatory incidences that are on the rise in Halifax area schools. Within this past year, there has been 360 incidences reported, not to mention those that are unreported, like my brother. And this is the first time that the Halifax Regional School Board has received this data. This was at the request of a board member last November after she had heard about what she calls extremely disturbing incidents at the elementary school level. And she's quoted saying, "You don't know how big a problem is until you start measuring it." So I have a meeting with the principal and vice principal tomorrow. I'm a little bit nervous, but this is what has to be done. When we're talking about Black liberation, when we're talking about the world that we want to envision for the next generation, we are talking about our children. We are talking about the environments in which they grow up and what we leave for them. And so this is a fight for Black liberation. We talk about issues that sometimes seem very large. And somewhere to start is by looking at our children and ensuring that we are leaving them with a better future than the one that we have. Thank you.
Begins the presentation. On the case of Abdulabdi, I'd like to Abdulabdi, I'd like to make the point that activists in Halifax have been central in the struggle to win at least some modicum of justice for him. And before I came up here, just before I was teaching, I ran into Elle Jones, and she was on the phone on dealing with this particular case. So she's played a very critical role, and Haligonians have played a very important role in this issue. But he's just one of many. You have the floor.
Okay, I could talk for a long time, so early I'm going to set my timer because I know we're already over, especially on a topic like this, and I hope you can hear me okay. Because topics of Black Lives Matter is a big passion of mine. So I could just take the whole 2 hours and talk about my passion, but I will take my 10 minutes and set my timer and do my best. So I'm very humbled to be here tonight, to be part of this panel, and to discuss how important the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King is. I'd like to also acknowledge the fact that we stand on the shoulders of ancestors who have gone before. And due homage is also given to those who have been enslaved, whose blood has been shed here in Nova Scotia, who have been shackled and whipped and hung in Canada. And we need to remember those lives who've been lost so that we can have freedom in Canada and do what we are doing. So I want to acknowledge that as well. And so the task at hand in 8 to 10 minutes is to continue the discussion, Black Lives Matter, in relation to Donald Trump's presidency. We were given a number of topics to focus on, but the time will not permit justice for each topic, and I'm glad that Tiffany and I had a chance to talk last night and to talk this morning. And I'm hoping that perhaps in the dialogue we can have more of those discussions. And like so many celebrities that often refer to Donald Trump as 45, and do not refer to him as Mr. President, I find it difficult to focus my topic around him and give him more airspace than is due. We already know that there's lots of coverage around what he is doing in the US and how that is impacting Canada. Based on his behavior, actions, and tweets since his presidency, it is clear he is racist, Islamophobic, sexist. The list goes on. And just this morning when we were sitting in CBC, he tried to declare that he is not a racist. And as recently as a couple of days ago, his statement about shithole country speaks volumes of his ignorance and propelled the people of the Caribbean to write a declaration. I applaud my brothers and sisters from the Caribbean for writing that declaration, for making sure that declaration went worldwide. And I can only hope that they have the power and the strength to make sure that that ill, diseased person does not step foot in the Caribbean. And the declaration is available for those who haven't seen it. I'm happy to share it around. The fact that after he was declared president, a movement started, not my president. And that was a nonviolent movement. And they were going against the fact that so many people voted for him. And they wanted to make it clear that there were still many people who did not. So in relation to how does this presidency affect Canada, we are seeing spillovers, even more racist open attacks and propaganda in Canada. I'm not saying that this issue did not always exist in Canada or in Nova Scotia. They have. Nova Scotia is known as the deep south of the north. That has not changed. We have and continue to have a history of segregation, racism, and discrimination. We have a history of uncomfortableness when we talk about the importance of Black Lives Matter. But yet those of us who are here, we're soldier on for those who came thinking that that discussion is not going to happen. It's going to happen. We're going to have that discussion tonight. And as an African Nova Scotia woman who faces daily assaults of discrimination and racism at the micro, which is evident tonight, and at the macro level, my wounds are always, always open. I applaud the young people and older people who revitalize the Black Lives Movement, who stay true to teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King and demonstrate in a nonviolent manner. Yet, in some cases, violence is incited by law enforcing officers and others in an attempt to silence and stop the movement. However, as Black people, we continue and must continue to organize. These types of movements have existed before the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer, George Zimmerman, in 2015. When people of African ancestry were enslaved, soldiers such as Harriet Tubman used a nonviolent strategy to free many. And many of us know her quote, "I could have fred 10,000 more if only they knew they were slaves." And this resonates with me because some of us are still enslaved. Some of us find it difficult to fight and to organize and to make it known that Black Lives Matter. But through the power of education, speech, willingness to suffer without retaliation, conviction, that the universe on the side of justice are core elements of what Dr. Martin Luther King practiced. And Tiffany, as if we were in each other's head, talked about his 6 basic steps of nonviolent action, and I won't go into detail about those. But the idea of information gathering, education, personal commitment, negotiation, direct action, and reconciliation, those were key steps that he did, that he took. And many of the movements that you have witnessed, that you've seen, are taking those exact same steps. These steps are important to implement in any movement. I like to consider myself an activist and an agent for change. In some of the demonstrations I've engaged in or witnessed, I can say with confidence that many of these steps are applied. Such demonstrations as the March Against the Downtown Establishments, led by the Cultural Writers Youth Group of Nova Scotia in the 90s. And those challenges still exist today, when we would just want to go downtown to get a dance on, to socialize, to be with each other. You'd be stopped in line and asked for 5 pieces ID. Your gold chains, you can't wear gold. You can't have a hat on. You have to have dress pants. And we would conform to a degree. No sooner you got in, the music would change. So we saw these things happen. And an organization of youth organized a march that went from George Dixon Community Recreation Center all the way down to St. Mary's University, and held a march that was well integrated with thousands and thousands of people to protest against the downtown establishments. Another demonstration was the selling of eeny, meeny, miny, mo dolls. Zellers, Christmas catalog, wanted to sell for kids eeny, meeny, miny, mo dolls. Many of us who are of African descent often can't find black dolls to play with. We have to sometimes go to the States, and people don't see that as being a problem. And so they thought having an eeny, meeny, miny, mo dolls that were very, very dark would be a great way to quiet the black community. It did the opposite. We marched and protested right in front of Zellers until every doll was removed from those stands. And contributions were made to the black community because of that. We've seen the whole movement in Sobeys when they did not racial profile an individual. And we saw the pictures of the individual. And that movement was also successful. The protests led around the Confederate flag and many others. The uniting of our Islamic brothers and sisters right here on our Dalhousie University campus. When the administration didn't organize or do anything, our brothers and sisters pulled their organization together and stood strong and proud and said, my life matters. The administration may not be telling us what the assault is happening to my people, but we as students, we as leaders will call and recognize the assault that has happened, and hopefully others will stand. And they had so many that came out for that movement. And again, that was a peaceful movement. And many others. And I applaud the soldiers, like some of you who are here this evening, that has been leaders or part of those demonstrations. I can't name you, but you know who you are. And despite these protests, people of African ancestry, black people, continue to fight for equity. The movement of Black Lives Matter never was intended to say other lives don't matter, but to bring attention to how black people were and continue to be treated in the justice, education, healthcare, and social systems as less than. We're in a position where we want to move from the margins to the center. The fact that we are the mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters of this nation, the mother and fathers and sisters and founders of science, our contributions often go unknown. And several of Dr. King's quotes talk about injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of brutality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. The tensions are not between the races, but between the forces of justice and injustice, between the forces of light and darkness. True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. So we need to have these tensions. Right? If you ignore it, I'll ignore it. I'm almost done. We need look at what's happening in presence. Some of the actions of 45 have had reverse effects. Some people have experienced acts of unity where there was hate, and yes, some have experienced more acts of open hate. But what can we do now with this knowledge in order to move the agenda of equity forward? We know the challenges of racial profiling, driving while black, working while black, Islamic phobia, xenophobia are present in Canada. We have enough proof of that. How can we today use the lessons of Dr. Martin Luther King to move forward? the fact that there was open dialogue about statues such as Cornwallis, research being completed about the Earl of Dalhousie and the financial contributions he received from his involvement in the slave trade, consideration of the renaming of churches, schools, and streets tells me that there is, at least for some, a willingness to listen and act. Although there are these examples, there are also enough examples that remind us that the struggle continues. The lack of charges to the Proud Boy organization that disrupted a peaceful protest by our Aboriginal brothers and sisters. The fact that no charges were laid against the man in Shelburne who purposely ran down 2 young black men. Despite these ongoing challenges, both by 45 within our own backyard, we need to all stand true to one of my favorite Martin Luther King's quotes. It does not matter where a person stands during times of comfort and convenience, but rather where that person stands during times of challenge and controversy. We are in a challenging and controversial time. We all need to stand.
Well, thank you to all the panelists who have given us tremendous food for thought and certainly have provided inspiration to galvanize us in the struggle to create a better world, a world fit for human beings, full with justice and with human dignity. So without any further ado, the floor is open for questions, and the first one is going to be Urban Carvery. And before you take the mic, Urban, I'd like to point out that Urban has been at the center of the Africville Genealogy Society. He's played a central role in not only keeping the memory of Africville alive, one of the great injustices in Canada and of course within Nova Scotia, but has always tied the struggle for Africville to the struggle for justice and human rights as a whole.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Isaac. I stand tonight in support of Abdul Abdi. And I want to talk about an irony. If there's anything that's called an irony, this is an irony. We have a commission that's been commissioned to look into the Nova Scotia Colored Home and the causes and effects that we found ourselves into. This young man is a victim of community services, the very same institution that was responsible for the Nova Scotia Colored Home. And yet, I don't hear anything from the commission, the voice that should be speaking out and pointing out the fact that this young man is a victim of systemic racism on the part of the Department of Community Services. The very same systemic racism that's seen the victims of the Nova Scotia Colored Home. The two things are tied, they are exactly the same thing. I don't care where they're from. This is a person of African descent who was treated with indignity, who was denied their rights as a Canadian citizen. And yet, the silence is deafening. Deafening. That commission needs to speak out. They have a real live systemic racism issue with Abdul Abdi. And we, all of us, Nova Scotians, need to speak up and say, this is what we're talking about when we talk about systemic racism. This is the impact, the real impact of systemic racism on the lives of black people in this province, as it has been for over 400 years, and it continues to be. So I think it's time that I just read in the paper that commission is looking for a year's extension to continue its work. I say no extension, no more work until you address the issue of Abdul Abdi right away tomorrow. Thank you.
Call for justice, Abdul Abdi, and tying it to the systemic issues. Okay, so anyone, any other questions? And if you have comments, keep them brief. Go ahead. Anybody? I see no hands up.
I do have a quick one. Very quick question.
Okay, what is your question?
My question is, what do you guys consider microaggression?
Calling us you guys.
is you guys?
The people I'm pointing to.
Okay, you know what? You're not framing that question for me as a white person. So who the hell is you guys?
I don't care what you think about your perspective. I don't know. I'm not talking to you. I'm asking you guys. And that's not a racial term. I could call you guys, you guys. You're guys, we're guys. You could call me, we're guys.
Okay, listen. Listen, we're spending too much time on it. Do you have anybody else?
No, I'm not responding.
I'm not responding to that. I don't think we're responding to that. Are there any other comments or questions?
You don't. Because you don't got a good answer, right?
Listen, I would like...
Never mind, just keep going.
You can't answer and Nick, you can't answer.
If you continue to disrupt, I'm going to ask you to leave.
Leave. I made my point. I've made my point. I've already made my point. Thank you very much. See you guys. Don't call me racist. Oh, bye guys. I'm racist now? Bye guys. Am I racist now? Hey, bye guys. Bye guys. Bye.
Okay. I said... Okay. Okay, everybody's attention. Everybody's attention. Ifo. Anybody else? Let me take this.
In the case of Abdul Adi, I'm wondering if we could find out some legal advice. The last time I checked, it's against the law in this country to do something that would knowingly cause someone's life to be at risk. Or there's something called, criminal negligence. So since the Prime Minister of this country is choosing to allow someone to be kidnapped from Kenya into Somalia, isn't that a charge of either attempted murder or complicity in the ending of someone's life? That seems like a very, very serious charge and a very, very serious situation. Because I don't think he would want a white person to be sent to a place where they could potentially be killed. So this is a situation where we ask ourselves, are we as black people considered human by Canada?
Who wants to? This is short. You want to go first?
I'm not a lawyer, so I don't think I have the authority to answer that question. Does anyone else on the panel want to?
No, that's a different question. I was responding to Mike. You couldn't respond to this person. I feel like you need to answer the question that he asked, so you can first respond to that question. Do you want to give him a response to this question? Do you want to repeat your question?
The question basically is, it's supposedly a crime in this country to knowingly do something that could potentially lead to someone's death. And also, if you have the chance to stop it and you don't, that's criminal negligence. So if the Prime Minister is refusing to do something to stop someone from being sent to a place where they could be potentially killed, isn't he actually violating one of the laws of this country?
No. Potentially. The word is potentially. Unless you have absolute, definitive proof that this action is going to cause the death of someone.
On the Government of Canada's site, it says that that Canadians should not go there because it's dangerous.
No, I don't think we would have a legal case.
And as someone who has a legal background, I agree with Irvin. I mean, it's not only a question of actually having to absolutely prove, right? But it's also a question of how the law is interpreted in a differential way it's enforced. But anyway,
thank you for all your patience and your attention to this matter. I just wanted to, for those who may be question what is microaggression, it is important to explain what we mean by that. And one of our folks in the audience did yell out, it was exactly what was happening in terms of you guys. And so microaggression can sometimes go unnoticed for many people. And it can be just something as simple or something as big. And so it's all in terms of how you interpret and how you feel. And so as a person of African descent, who was one of few people in my department, for instance, and I'll give you examples, we could be having a function, and there could be a lunch that everybody's being invited to. But for some reason, I'm not being invited. But I don't know why. My name didn't come up, I wasn't suggested to go. But I'm made to feel left out of things. Another example is the way that people refer to people of African descent by saying you people. by saying things like you guys, or it's a problem that's separate from other things. So it almost tries to denote that we're less than. And it can be something as simple as even walking past somebody and ignoring them and not seeing them, treating them as invisible. Or if you're in a position of power and you are that supervisor and you're giving direction, and somebody comes into a space and they say, I want to speak to the supervisor, and you come out and you say, I'm the supervisor, and they'll look at you and say, but I'm looking for the manager, the real supervisor. And so they question your existence in your being in ways that sometimes go unnoticed, but if it happens often enough, you're able to define what's happening. Even in terms of when we go to buy certain products in the grocery store, in the supermarket, hair products, in their own little separate corner that says black hair products. That also is a form of microaggression. And so, even though it may be complex to define, it's not complex to feel.
And as a person, so to echo what Barbara said, because as a black faculty member at Dalhousie now for over 25 years, and having talked to the black faculty members, everyone has suffered some form of microaggression. And one of the ones I always like to pinpoint about my existence was being told by a colleague that I'm an established, not to pat myself on the back, an established Cuban scholar who's spoken all over the world. I'm being told by a colleague that, Isaac, you'd be a much better speaker. Basically, if I helped you stop saying so forth at the end of your sentence. And what I'm going to do at this committee meeting, which is a very important committee meeting, is I'm going to kick you on your leg every time you say it. And then, at first I was stunned, and then they proceeded to do that. Okay? So these are things that happen, right? And perhaps that person thought they were doing me a favor in some bizarre, twisted way. But unfortunately, what's important about this as well, and I'm the moderator, I don't want to go long. But what I want to talk about is these microaggressions become cumulative. Yes. Okay, very cumulative, and they build up in your system when you face not only this, but others, questioning your intellectual ability. When you're published more than a lot of people, right? Questioning, your right to be here and so on and so forth. So these things build up over a long period of time, right? And in a sense become quite poisonous, and it can make you a very angry person sometimes. But that being said, anyone else? I don't see any hands up or questions or comments. So I'll start with you, right? Okay, yeah, perfect. And then I've got you, there in the back, then I've got you, perfect. Okay.
Hi, everyone.
And if you could, Keela Wu, right?
Okay, my name is Keela Wu. My question just kind of brings it back to Trump and some of the issues that we started off with. I feel that a lot of his tweets and his comments and his positions are provocative, and they're meant to get us to react. And I feel we do that, and we do create solidarity, and we form, we have these talks, but what can we do that is proactive? As groups, as Black Lives Matter groups, as anybody in marginalized groups, how do we respond in a way that is taken with authority and with power, and that gets mentioned in the media that's more positive than negative, instead of us just continuing to speak his messages over and over and over again, essentially doing his work, which is what he wants us to be doing, and the team behind him wants us to be doing, because when Trump is gone, someone else will be there in his place doing the same thing. So how do we just be a more intelligent, proactive force that has an opposition and not so defensive?
Thank you. Who wants to go first on that?
So I think. Is it working? Yeah? Okay. All right, so I think that's an excellent question. Thanks for asking. I think that the way it happens, we get in front of the story. So realistically speaking, we know what we need to do to gain power, and we know that education is key to that. So start educating ourselves on exactly how, for instance, in his case, how the voting process actually was won by apathy. Why we do have to actually participate in our democratic process. But more than that, with things that are issues that we know about, like immigration, for instance, when it comes to education and other equality issues, we get in front of those stories. So we start to just take action, community and collective action about how we're going to improve our schools for all children, not just white children, but all children. So we get in front of positive action, so we're kind of galvanizing and mobilizing the good. And then he can have his reactions and have his little Twitter wars with whoever he's going to have, but we're getting in front of it. It's like, okay, so this is happening, and we're helping lunch programs, and we're helping all these other people maybe in lower SES, social economic status, to actually be helped and to be served, and showing that we as a people find them to be important and that they do indeed matter.
Thanks for the question. I think it's a great one as well. And what comes to mind is that sometimes it takes difficult conversations and knee-jerk reactions to unite people to action, to galvanize people to action. So in the case of Obama, I think we saw a positive galvanization when in 2008, where there was a lot of excitement around being the first Black president. He was so charismatic, he has an amazing family. So a lot of people came out and they voted. And then it was a difficult time for the 8 years. I mean, he did a lot of great work, but Hillary didn't seem to be a great contender for a lot of people. So then we have Trump. And even though there's been a lot of negative reaction, I think sometimes we're galvanized to action when bad things happen and when not so fortunate things happen and when good things happen. In this case, I've seen a lot of unity across races, across genders around Trump and a lot of the issues that have come up under his presidency. Sexism, huge. A lot of people are standing up. Racism, something that we're always dealing with, but it's becoming a national, international conversation. And I think it's important for us to realize that it's happening and find ways to meaningfully participate. So even in Halifax, we have like Solidarity Halifax, Working While Black. There's the DSU that you can participate in. There are so many groups in this area that if you latch onto an issue that you find that you're passionate about, get involved in the community somehow. Dr. Singhani mentioned, oh, you're right there, okay. He mentioned that we have a working group on racial profiling that we put together for Street Check. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, get in contact with me or Dr. Singhani, you can come on the team. But there are a lot of things happening in the community, and I think we have to pay attention to Trump, but also pay attention to the backlash and how we can organize in a positive way around it. But thanks for the question. That's great.
Do you want us all to answer the
It's up to you. It's up to you.
One thing that I would add in there is the fact that, similar to what my friends are saying, is there was a time when St. Mary's tried to bring a white supremacist to Halifax, and through strong unity and action, he did not get that platform. He was sent away and not given and did not speak. And so I applaud the people of the Caribbean for the declarations they put out. And I think that we shouldn't wait for things like this to happen, that we need to figure out how can we institute a declaration that also speaks to him not being welcomed because of his ideology in certain places. And then try and get behind whoever in positions of power to help us advocate and support that. But at least we can go on paper saying, as a united front, we are not in support of Trump putting foot in the places where people of color, where women, where folks who are Muslim are, and that's one action that we need to take. So building on what the people of the Caribbean have done, I think would be a great action that we can start doing. I hope they never get to know my doctor's sentence.
I guess just building off of what my other panelists have mentioned, I think the first thing is to recognize that these tweets are not just tweets. They are a form of violence, and they empower people, like we've seen today, to enact that. And that we need to take a stand against that. It's not just a Twitter post. We are talking about people's lives. I think we need to continue mobilizing, using social media and other means of communication, and really be the ones shaping our narrative. There are a lot of stories that are about us and about our communities that are not written with us, and they need to be. And then, I guess, Barb just talked about this, but building solidarity within our movement and with other movements, and recognizing that this is not just something that is happening in the United States, but it is happening actively here, and looking for ways to engage with people who are doing this work, and showing our solidarity with them.
So for people who are incited to speak out and to join a movement and do these things, it's great when there is a movement and there's kind of, there's the momentum behind that, but when it all dies down and the media has died down.
And we see women who speak out against male colleagues. We see people of color speak out against white people in power. There's typically not a lot of support to be found against the system and the hierarchies and the patriarchy and the racism and discrimination. So all these are really good, suggestions, and people will definitely take heed of them and join when it's hot, but when it's cooled down and they've moved on to another media story, there are a lot of people that are left very vulnerable because they were passionate, they spoke out, and they had an opinion, and they become victims. So, we need to have a bit more support structure in place along with, the activist movements.
So I'm going to be rushing around because I have a list in my head. Okay, there you go.
This isn't so much a question, but a comment on the person, and in regards to the microaggressions, which I think really bordered on full-on aggression, obviously, was failure to recognize the authority or the format here. So trying to bypass, I think, was I wanted to really kind of highlight that in this, not so much just the aggressive language, but not recognizing the format or accepting the position where he would have had a position, a place to speak and to have his voice heard.
It's an expression of white privilege.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody. I just wanted to ask what you all think people who can't identify as Black, to explain what Blackness really means and what Blackness is, and to extend that to Caribbean people as well, who have been taken from the motherland and taken to a strange land and to create, we basically had to create our own culture, and we're still in between that place of I am Black, I am Caribbean, but I am also African, and who am I really? So yeah, my question basically is, what do you consider Blackness to be? Is it a spirit? Is it a heritage? Is it a place? And I know Blackness is in skin color, but I just want to know your opinion on Blackness.
Okay, well, thanks for the question. Very interesting. I would say that if you asked me this question in August, pre-philosophy of race, with Dr. Jeffers, then I would have had a much easier answer to it. My own experience of being Black is accepting my identity as being of African descent, but I'm also mixed, and when I say that, I mean my grandfather is white, my grandmother's half Cuban, I'm Jamaican, I come from a melting pot of people, and that's my background, that's my heritage. I'm an immigrant to Canada, I consider myself Jamaican Canadian, but my Blackness comes from my recognition of being of African descent. Now, going through the philosophy of race class, it becomes very difficult because not everyone identifies in the same way. And I think when it comes to personal identity, it's something you work out for yourself. And it can be very difficult and it can be very challenging. But wherever it is that you center your identity, I think sometimes it's uncomfortable to have these conversations with yourself, but wherever you center your identity, that becomes legitimate. So I would just say it's a personal question. It's a journey you have to answer for yourself and consolidate for yourself. How I see myself as a Black woman who's mixed is not going to be how another Black woman sees herself. So that would be my response to that, but I think it's a great question.
I think it's okay. I feel as far as being part of the diaspora, like anybody who has any sort of descent of any kind, and it's mixed with other beautiful things as well, you're a part of that family. You're a part of this. Like, this isn't something you have to earn. This is something you are. You have this about you. And to be honest, most of us do have it about us, whether we know it or not. The fact of the matter is just being of any sort of descent, whether we're dispersed, wherever we're dispersed, because that's really what it is, we are still all a part of that family, and knowing that we all have that common lineage. And we do. We all do. Whether we can prove it, backtrack it, what have you, we do. We wear it every day. We wear it when we go out and interact with the world. So it's a family that you're a part of. And you just have to claim it, really. That's what I think.
I too think it's a very complex question, and I can tell you that growing up in Nova Scotia was always very challenging for people of African descent and for Black people, especially where we didn't have the opportunity to be immersed by people who looked like us on a daily basis. So most of our school systems, our teachers were predominantly white. The stuff we saw on TV was predominantly white. The lawyers, the judges, the only people we saw that was often Black when I was growing up were those who were in custodians. And there's nothing wrong with those positions, but we seldom saw people of color in positions of power. And so growing up as a Black child in Nova Scotia, some of us didn't even want to be recognized or didn't want to accept our Blackness because with Blackness came negativity. And so it goes back to the idea of developing that identity and that sense of pride in who you are and making that connection to a land that is stronger than all of us. And often when I talk to my students, I remind them that all of them got a little bit of Blackness in them because Lucy was the mother of civilization. So when people decide to be racist in any kind of way, I remind them, you know, that 1 ounce, that drop rule, when we had mixed children, if you just had that little drop of Black, you were Black, everyone in this room has that little ounce of Black because they are descendants of Lucy. And so that whole identity of Blackness comes from your immersion, your understanding, your connection to something bigger than yourself. And when it comes to the idea of when we standing together in unity, and that as Black people, and that's one thing I love about being Black, is that you're never, ever, ever alone in the struggle. And there's very few cultures that unite the way that Black people unite.
I think that's a good place to end.
I'm going to try to just make a quick comment. When I saw the description, I was a little bit bothered that Trump was even included, and so I appreciate Barb's comments. But then tonight, I guess I see why it's necessary. That, you know, and while I'm a woman and experience some oppression, my white privilege overrides most of that. So I don't know what it's like for other people since Trump, you know, by experience. But what I would like to say is that my concern around focusing on Trump is that there's a whole lot of people who identify themselves as white liberals who are really racist. And focusing so much on Trump allows them a pass. And, you know I have ongoing work to do to understand things and to, you know, to fight for other people. But I just wanted to express that concern that, you know, and I'm glad to see there's a lot of white people here because usually I'm one of like 5 at an event like this. But I just would like to encourage all of the white people in here to call people out when you see their racist nonsense. Thanks.
Does anyone on the panel want to respond to that? Or?
Hi. Hi. So I don't go to DAlbsac. I'm at St. Mary's, and I'm from Antigua, so I'm from a predominantly Black place. And coming to Halifax, it's like the middle of nowhere, has been such a culture shock because. I'm sorry. I'm from the middle of nowhere.
Caledonian Hearts.
Welcome anyway, you know?
So it's been a really hard transition, coming from a place where I was comfortable most of the time to a place where I've literally become self-conscious, like entering a room. So there's just been like a whole bunch of stuff going on. The videos, Trump, just like small microaggressions that I have to face too. And one of my questions is, how do I not become an angry person? Because there's like sometimes so much tension, and at St. Mary's there's like a Caribbean society, there's like an African society, but sometimes you feel like you're only allowed to be comfortable in like an exclusively Black space, if that makes sense. So if you're not really in that space, you're just constantly like moving through all these tense situations. Yeah.
Mississippi of the North.
No, seriously. So kind of like, I don't want to say I'm losing my spirit, but it's very, very hard to just keep a positive mindset. And I'm trying not to become an angry person based on the circumstances. But also, I'm curious as to how to go about like at my school, try to form a more unified Black voice, or like a more unified Black, I would say maybe a movement, because it's kind of like segregated. Like the Africans are they tend to stick with people from Africa, and Caribbean people, even there is segregation within the Caribbean. Like there's literally segregation everywhere. So how do I go about kind of, yeah, like making black and not like you're black but you're Caribbean or you're black but you're African. Like it's all over the place. So that's my message.
Thank you. I was serious about Welcome to Nova Scotia. We've been here for over 400 years, and we have never been comfortable outside of our own communities. One of our survival mechanisms is a direct result of an action on the part of the white community to try and eliminate us. And that was isolating us in our own communities, hoping that we would all die. But in that place called community, we built our communities and we found our strength. When I lived in Africville, and I had to go to school up over the hill into the white community when they desegregated our schools, one of the worst things could happen to you was to be held after school, because that meant you had to walk home by yourself through the white community, where white men would put their dogs on you, where white men would tell you, you little nigger, get back down on the shit shore where you belong. So once arriving in Africville, you felt the comfort of the community because everybody in your community suffered the same kind of everyday existence. So we have never been comfortable here. So I often question, we are the first refugees in Nova Scotia. How come the refugees that they brought to Nova Scotia, they never worked with the first refugee community to welcome them here to Nova Scotia? Because they don't want that unity. They want to keep us separate. They want to keep us separate in terms of, I'm from Antigua, I'm from Jamaica, I'm from North Preston, I'm from East Preston, I'm from Africville. It's those divisions that continue to give them the power that they're looking for. So welcome to Nova Scotia, but we all just got to work a little harder. Now, to your question about blackness, I'm a status Mi'kmaq. I'm a status Mi'kmaq, right? Like my grandmother is Mi'kmaq. That qualifies me to be a Mi'kmaq. But I grew up in a black community. So people often ask me, well, Irvin, why don't you go for your status? Well, I can't, because I would see that as betraying my culture. Because my culture is black, and that's what I grew up, black. Even though my paperwork says I could be something different. But it's all about how you grow up. It's all about your mental attitude. So black is more than the color of your skin, right? It's your soul.
Would it be possible for me to comment?
But before you do that, okay, before you do that, I was remiss when I did my introductions. I mean, I was rushing from the class, rushing here, and I was remiss, and I forgot to acknowledge the presence of the former Lieutenant Governor General of Nova Scotia, Mayan Francis, who sits in I do that not because she wants that recognition.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out. And before I give the gifts to all our panelists, I want to invite you out again on Monday, February 5th, when we are going to have another event on our African Heritage Month. I thought I put it here. The topic is why Black Unity, Pan-Africanism, the housing, and the world. That's the topic. And our main speakers are Dr. Isaac Sani again and Dr. Chike Jeffers. And we'll have African drummers. It's going to be very, very wonderful. not going to be in this room, it's going to be in 303/302. So it's going to be a bigger place, and it's the eve of the opening of the 200th centennial anniversary for DAO. So I want you to come back and come out. Thank you very much for coming.
What time is it?
Oh, it's 6 p.m. It's always 6 to 8, room 303, February 5th, Monday, February 5th. Thank you.
Yeah.